Hello everybody, this is Graeme Anderson, and today I'm going to be looking at Dungeon Decorators. Now in this game, the evil overlord is dead, and pretenders from all over the realm just want to set up the perfect dungeon. That's where you, a dungeon decorator, come in. You'll be competing against the other decorators to create the perfect lair for the new evil overlord. Now in this game, you're going to be drafting tiles and using them for either their dungeon side, which will expand your dungeon, or use them for the decoration side, which will make your dungeon look more beautiful, I suppose. Choosing low numbered tiles might be less powerful with fewer options, but allows you to go earlier next turn. You also need to be drafting tiles that will allow you to finish the goal cards that you have in your hand. So, will this game be the pinnacle of dungeon design and secure your win? Or will this be a game eliminated in the first round of judging? Let's get at the table, see how it's played, and we'll come back for my final thoughts on Dungeon Decorators. Here's Dungeon Decorator set up for 4 players. Each player has a starting tile which they will build their dungeon around. Randomly place the player pawns on the drafting order track and place their scoring cube on 0. Put the generic dungeon tiles off to one side and shuffle the 120 tiles and randomly remove 20 of them. Place 50 in each bag and add the 3 hourglass tiles to the red bag. Randomly draw one of each of the boss card decks and return the rest to the box. These will be additional ways to score points at the end of the game. Shuffle the Shape Goals deck and the Decoration Goals deck and deal 3 cards of each to each player. The players will then discard any 2 cards from their hands, so they're left with 4. Before we get into the gameplay, let's have a quick look at the tiles and tile placement rules. The goal of the game is to be building up a dungeon and to try to achieve different goals during the game. Each tile is double-sided but will be placed with the decoration side face up during the drafting phase of the game. This decoration side shows you everything you need to know about the other side of the tile. Each of these white decorations will correspond to a path on the other side. If the path on the other side is colored, then there will be a colored corner on the decoration side. If there's a star on the other side, then there will be a star on the decoration side as well. There are only 2 types of tiles: hallway tiles, which have 2 or more exits, and a room tile, which will only have 1 exit. When placing a tile, you will choose which side you want to place, and that will determine the rules for placement. A decoration tile can only be placed next to a wall in your dungeon. This shows that that decoration is in that hallway. You can never place a decoration tile so that it blocks a hallway. To place a dungeon tile, you can never place it so that it creates a dead end to a decoration tile. You must be able to trace a route from the just placed tile back to your starting tile, and you must always have at least one open hallway in your dungeon to expand into. You may place a tile so it dead ends into another dungeon tile as long as it meets the other requirements. To play around, draw 4 tiles from the bag and sort them from the lowest to the highest numerical order with the decoration side up onto the 4 spots on the drafting board. If the blue bag runs out, you start to draw from the red bag. If you draw an hourglass out of the red bag, set it to a side and continue drawing. But if this is the 3rd hourglass drawn, the game ends immediately. The players will then go in order based on where their pawn is on the drafting board and select 1 tile to add to the dungeon. Whichever tile a player selects, they will put their pawn underneath it, and this will determine turn order for the next round. There is a special space where you will not draft one of the display tiles, but draw a random tile from the bag and place it in front of you, then select either a shape goal or decoration goal card, then you must discard a card from your hand so you're back down to 4 cards. If the tile you drafted has a color icon on it, this is an assistant and is resolved immediately. The Goblin Sapper assistant will allow you to take one of the generic tiles put aside during the setup and use it either as a generic hallway or a generic room. The Burrow Bro assistant will allow you to draw 2 tiles from the bag and choose which of the 3 tiles that you have to use. The other 2 tiles are removed from the game, they're not put back into the bag. The Arcane Architect grants you a matching token which you can spend during the build phase of your turn to move or rotate a single tile already in your dungeon. And finally, the Decorative Mimic grants you a Mimic token which can be used during the scoring phase to temporarily turn a green decoration into any decoration you want. This transformation is only temporary and only when scoring a single card. Once the Mimic token has been used, the green decoration returns back to normal. Once you have activated any of the newly acquired assistants, you must place your tile. You can either store it for later use by placing it on your player board, but you can only store 2 of these tiles here, or you can place it in your dungeon. If you have no legal place to place the new tile, it is removed from the game. After you have placed all your newly acquired tiles, you get the opportunity to score 1 or more cards from your hand. Play each card that you want to score, show where it is in your dungeon, and then score the points. Place the card face down next to your player board. You will not lose points if in your dungeon at a later time you no longer meet that previously scored card's requirements. Let's have a quick look at the two different types of scoring cards before we continue. The first type is decoration goals. They will grant you points for decorations either in a hallway or a room. If you meet the requirements, you're going to be scoring the points as shown here. Now, it should be pointed out that the hallway goal cards are a little different because your hallways are all connected as one large hallway according to the placement rules. So having the decorations anywhere in the hall tile would satisfy the hallway decoration card. Now, the shape cards give you points if you have the tiles that are in a certain shape and meet certain requirements. The shape may be rotated or reflected anywhere in your dungeon. There are often other requirements for certain tiles within that shape, such as a room or it has a certain color. After scoring cards, if you have less than 4 cards, you draw from either goal deck to refill your hand back up to 4. It is now the next player's turn. The game will end immediately when the third hourglass is drawn. You do not finish the round unless the third hourglass is drawn during the round. Then you're going to continue until every player has finished their turn. You will then score end of game points to be added to the points you gain from goal cards during the game. 3 points for each star in your dungeon, either in the hallway or a room. You score points for having different colors in your dungeon, from 0 points for either 0 or 1 color, all the way up to 16 points for having 6 different colors in your dungeon. Then you're going to find the single color that you have the most of and score 0 points for only having 0 to 1 tile of that most common color, all the way up to 24 points for having 6 tiles of that color. Finally, score points based on the bosses picked at the start of the game. Then, the player with the most points is the winner. Now let's get back to see what I thought about Dungeon Decorators. So, theme and components. The theme, although fun and whimsical, is non-existent in the actual gameplay. The items around the gameplay definitely try to inject some theme, like how all the goal cards are named something thematic, but the game itself doesn't feel overly thematic. As for the components, they're nothing special, and honestly they're a bit bland. The tiles are decent quality, and they do show everything you need to know on the decoration side. It's just they're kind of bland and maybe a little clip arty. The goal cards themselves are pretty boring. I mean, they do show you what you need to do, and they are readable, but they look boring. The boss cards on the other hand do have some art on them. They look a little more interesting, but it's unfortunate that the goal cards, which you see the most of, are just kind of boring. So the components overall are nothing special. On to the gameplay. The game is simple, and I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, but it's an easy to teach game, which means it's a very welcoming game. You pick which tile you want, that dictates the player order for the new round. Then you place your tile and you try and score. It's really straightforward. But that doesn't mean the game is that simplistic. You still have a fair number of decisions to be made during the game. For example, the drafting of the tile. If there's the perfect tile out there, then of course you're going to grab it, even if it means you're going to go last next round. On the other hand, if there is no perfect tile, do you just take the first one so you get to go first next round? Or you maybe go for the exchange space. We're not going to go first, but maybe you're going to get lucky with drawing the tile out of the bag that you need. Sometimes the choice is obvious, but when it's not, I like the little bit of thinkiness that you have. Do you go for a tile that's decent or maybe has a good assistant on it, or go for a good turn order? Again, this is not something that's going to burn your brain, but it's a good decision point in the game. And placing the tiles also offers some good decisions. But you are driven by finishing off your goal cards or shooting for the end of game scoring. But often, the tile can work in more than one goal. So do you spread yourself thin and try to do all the goals at the same time? Or maybe focus on one goal and maybe make it more difficult to do another one later on? Some of the higher point cards are definitely more difficult to get. So again, do you just go for the easy ones and try and do a lot of those? Now, I'm not saying there's a huge depth of decisions to be made in this game. And maybe there's a few too many times when it's kind of too obvious what you should be doing with a tile, but I felt that was maybe not always the case, and it did leave it open for some decisions to be made some of the time. Now, I do have some issues with the game, and one of them has to do with the turn order. Often during the game, when you're going last in turn order, it's very difficult to get to the front of the line so you can pick first, especially with 4 players. I understand that the higher number of tiles definitely have more options on them, and they generally have more decorations and paths on them, but if you need a certain tile or tiles, going last means you're always getting the leftovers. Now, I've never had a game where one player was always last, because at some point someone wants that last tile. But while you are last and you have very few options, and you have to play whatever tile you take, because you can't voluntarily discard the tile, having that several times in a row is just not fun. Now, I know the game is trying to be balanced by making the lower value tiles less enticing, but since you're often trying to finish off goals, and that's the main point of the game, having to pick the largest variety is definitely more beneficial. And this last space issue will eventually rotate through all the players, so it should even out during the game, but still, when it's your turn, you have that little choice, it's not fun. Now, my other minor issue is that with less than 4 players, you're still drawing out 4 tiles. That doesn't feel quite right. Going last, in that sense, is not much of a deterrent. I would like a game that was scaled better. I think I would have preferred maybe drawing less tiles equal to the player count, but then you'd have to cut down on the number of tiles in the bag, so I'm not sure how that would work. The game works best at 4 players, less so at the other player counts. At 2 players, it's definitely easier to get the tiles you want, but in some ways that takes away from the gameplay tension, as you're kind of losing that incentive to go first or disincentive to go last, as there's really not much difference with 2 players. I was also not a huge fan of the randomness, especially of the goal cards. They can be all over the place. Sometimes you have goal cards that just work together, while other times they almost seem to be at odds with each other. I preferred maybe to have a bunch of face-up cards to choose from when I had to draw, so I could try and get cards that would be complementary to what I already had in my hand. As it is, sometimes you draw a goal card and just know it's not worth the effort to try and do. And my last little issue is actually with the game length. The game ends when the 3rd hourglass is drawn. I would almost want there to be, another trigger. As the games I have played, that 3rd hourglass is among the last few tiles, the game feels overly long. So I wish there was another way to end the game. A number of goals finished, or the size of a dungeon, or something else, and have that 3rd hourglass, as the final trigger. For what you're doing in the game, drafting tiles, adding them to your dungeon, and trying to score a card, it lasts a little too long and can get a little boring near the end of the game, especially for this lighter style of game. So, would I recommend this game? This one is really on the fence for me, but I think I'm going to come down just on the yes side. I would. I don't think this game is going to replace similar games in your collection, but this might be added to your rotation of similar games. I enjoyed the main drafting mechanism of which tiles select will determine your player order next round. I liked the fact that the tiles were double-sided and you had to make the call when you added the tile to your dungeon as to which side it was be, because you can't change it afterwards. I liked that there was always multiple goals to be working towards on each turn, and you often might have to sacrifice one goal for another. Unfortunately, I did find that the game doesn't scale as well as I would have hoped for. I think it works best for 4 because of that decision of what tile and turn order is so much more important. It gets progressively less so and less enjoyable the fewer players you have. But then with a full complement of players, going last is really not that enjoyable. I also felt that the game just felt a little too long for what you're doing in each game. Each turn felt the same as the last, so you kind of wanted the game to end sooner than it actually did. And finally, I found the components to be just kind of bland and okay. Overall though, I think I'm going to give this game a 6.5 out of 10. Dungeon Decorators doesn't stand above other games of this type, but happily mingles amongst them with a whimsical theme. Unfortunately, it is let down by the repetitive actions due to the overly long game length and the randomness of the goals. And that's it for the moment. Until next time, thanks for watching.